How strong is Jean Grey in Spider-Man Brand New Day? What happens when one of the most powerful telepaths in Marvel suddenly enters Spider-Man's world? Jean Grey isn't just another superpowered mutant. She is one of the most dangerous minds in the Marvel Universe, and if she really plays a major role in Spider-Man Brand New Day, Peter Parker could be facing an opponent he can't simply punch his way out of. So, just how powerful would Jean Grey be compared to Spider-Man? Let's start with the biggest advantage Jean has: her mind. Spider-Man is incredibly fast, strong, agile, and has one of the best danger senses in the Marvel Universe. But none of that automatically protects him from telepathy. Jean can potentially enter someone's mind, read their thoughts, communicate mentally, influence their perceptions, and attack them without physically touching them. That creates a completely different kind of fight for Peter. Imagine Spider-Man jumping across buildings, dodging attacks, and preparing to strike Jean, only to realize that the battle was happening inside his head the entire time. And that is what makes Jean so dangerous. Peter's spider sense can warn him when physical danger is coming. But what happens when the attack isn't a punch, a weapon, or a projectile? What if the threat is Jean simply reaching into his mind? That could make fighting her extremely difficult. But Jean isn't only a telepath. She is also a powerful telekinetic. With telekinesis, Jean can manipulate objects using her mind. Depending on the version of the character, her abilities can reach an enormous scale. She can lift, throw, restrain, or crush objects without physically touching them. And this creates another major problem for Spider-Man. Peter's greatest advantage in combat is his movement. He can swing around buildings, flip over enemies, crawl across walls, and change direction almost instantly. But Jean doesn't necessarily need to chase him. She can simply control the environment around him. Imagine Spider-Man launching himself toward Jean at full speed. Instead of Jean dodging, she could potentially stop him in mid-air with telekinesis. Peter's strength would still be impressive, but raw strength doesn't mean much if you can't physically reach your opponent. And that's where Jean becomes a nightmare matchup for Spider-Man. However, there's something even more important. Jean Grey has access to one of the most terrifying powers associated with the X-Men, the Phoenix Force. Now, this is where things get complicated. Jean Grey and the Phoenix have an extremely complicated history in Marvel Comics, and not every version of Jean is connected to the Phoenix in the same way. So if Brand New Day uses Jean, we shouldn't automatically assume she will have the full power of the Phoenix. But if Marvel ever allows Jean to access that level of power, Spider-Man wouldn't even be in the same league. The Phoenix Force has been portrayed as a cosmic-level power capable of manipulating enormous amounts of energy and affecting life on a massive scale. At that point, we're no longer talking about a normal superhero fight. We're talking about a cosmic battle, and Peter Parker would be completely outmatched. But here's the interesting part. Jean doesn't necessarily need the Phoenix to defeat Spider-Man. Even standard Jean Grey could potentially be one of the worst matchups for Peter, because Spider-Man is primarily a physical fighter. Peter can overpower many enemies. He can dodge bullets. He can survive enormous impacts. He can even fight opponents much stronger than himself. But Jean attacks in a completely different way. She can attack the battlefield, the environment, and potentially Peter's mind itself. And this brings us to one of the biggest questions surrounding Brand New Day. Could Jean actually control Spider-Man? In the comics, Jean has demonstrated extremely powerful telepathic abilities. But Spider-Man isn't completely helpless against psychic attacks. His mind has been unusually resilient in certain stories, and his spider sense gives him an extraordinary awareness of danger. So Jean controlling Peter wouldn't necessarily be an automatic win. It would depend heavily on the version of Jean, the circumstances, and how Marvel chooses to portray their abilities. And that's what could make their confrontation so interesting. Because Spider-Man isn't stronger than Jean. He's smarter in a different way. Peter is an incredible improviser. When he's under pressure, he constantly analyzes his surroundings and finds creative solutions. He has defeated enemies who are physically stronger than him simply by using strategy, speed, and his environment. So if Peter realizes that Jean is attacking his mind, he might try to avoid giving her a direct confrontation. He could use his webbing. He could stay mobile. He could attack from unpredictable angles. And most importantly, Peter could try to exploit one of Jean's biggest weaknesses, concentration. But even then, Jean has another advantage. She doesn't need to physically overpower Peter. She only needs to disrupt him long enough to stop the fight. And that's why a battle between Spider-Man and Jean Grey could be incredibly one-sided if Jean is allowed to use her full abilities. In terms of physical strength, Spider-Man wins. In terms of agility and close combat, Spider-Man probably wins. In terms of raw durability, Peter has the advantage. But in telepathy, Jean completely dominates. In telekinesis, Jean has the advantage. And if the Phoenix Force enters the equation, the power gap becomes almost ridiculous. Spider-Man is a street-level to superhuman hero who can occasionally punch far above his weight class. Jean Grey, at her highest levels, is a character who can reach far beyond the normal superhero scale. So if Brand New Day gives us a Jean Grey who is simply a powerful mutant, Spider-Man could potentially survive by using intelligence, speed, and strategy. But if Marvel introduces a Jean with her strongest comic book abilities, Peter Parker may finally encounter an enemy he can't defeat by simply being Spider-Man. Because you can dodge a punch, you can dodge a missile, you can even dodge a bullet. But how do you dodge someone who can attack your mind? And that might be the real danger Jean Grey brings to Spider-Man's world.